thank you for tuning into Sales Talk, a show where we discuss all topics related to B2B sales with a bias, of course, towards the actionable tactics from influential sales leaders that we all know and follow across our favorite social media platforms. I'm your host, Ross Van Wyk, and joining me as co-host is David Zambordi. Today we have Cory Bray, who's a sales leader, multiple-time author, and co-founder to discuss sales coaching. Cory, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Cory, one thing I appreciate about your content is that you have an opinion and that you're not afraid to take the gloves off to defend it. So when we saw your recent post related to sales coaching, which is a hot topic, we wanted to dig in a little bit more. Every sales manager knows that they should be doing sales coaching, but even though they have the tools and the best practices at their disposal, I feel like this is still a problem area for a lot of sales managers and teams. So let's go ahead and jump into the post that we saw this week and as a starting off point. So in the post, you emphasize that focusing solely on listening to calls may not be the best coaching approach. Could you share a little bit more on some of the alternative strategies or maybe what you meant by that?
Well, I think that people that start with the call are starting in the wrong place, because what we've got to do is start with the end in mind. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish with the sales team? And then how do we distill that down to the individual salesperson? And an individual salesperson is going to have a variety of metrics that you have access to at a glance, ideally. And if you don't have them at a glance, somebody else can get them to you, which then makes them available to you at a glance. These metrics might be something like win rate, deal cycle duration, stage duration. How long does it take from a deal? How long are your deals spending in each stage? Deal size, quota attainment. There's just a handful of metrics that are relevant to each individual salesperson. So whenever we think about coaching, one of the things I always say is coach the player, not the play. Folks look at these call recording tools. They're like, that's how we do coaching. I was like, cool. Well, there's lots of things that happen outside of that. Mm-hmm. And so what we say is look at each one of the tools that you have as a potential place to find symptoms of a problem. You might look at a call recording tool, a CRM, your analytics platform, your prospecting platform, the calendar, if they're struggling with time management, direct conversations you have with them or indirect conversations you have with other people about them, observations on a trade show floor, lots of places to gather data. And so the whole idea here is look at all of the different places where you can get insight into what's the thing that could move the needle with this person the most. How do we diagnose and prioritize that? And it might either be the lowest hanging fruit, something we can get a really quick win with, or it might be something that, hey, it's not a super quick win, but it's something that's going to have a really big impact. Let's figure that out. And then we start figuring out, okay, well, how are we actually going to coach that? So I'll give you one example. If the person's not setting next steps, well, if they're not setting next steps, you don't have to listen to the whole call. Go listen to the last 5 minutes of the call. Are they asking for next steps? How are they asking for next steps? And when they ask, what type of response are they getting? Well, okay, if they're not asking, that's pretty easy. If they're running out of time, then it's time management in the call. Or if they're asking and getting pushback, then I might go back to the original top of the call and say, well, how are we kicking off an agenda for this and setting the expectation that at the end of the call, we're going to ask for next steps? So there's specific areas in the call that we could go listen to. We could train our ear to listen in 2x, 2.5x. It's not that hard. If you spend a little bit of time doing it, you'll get it real fast. And then all of a sudden, we've taken this burden off our shoulders. We're like, we're going to go listen to calls and just go scavenger hunt. No, start with the metrics. What are we trying to impact? And then go find the specific areas in the call. That's what I'm talking about.
I had a quick question for you, Cory. First of all, I love the LinkedIn content. You ruffle some feathers. You speak your mind. That's what LinkedIn needs. I love it. I'm a fan. For this post specifically, so are you saying that, when let's say a VP of sales goes to listen to a call, at that point it's too reactive to even coach? They need to be more proactive, set up some, like you said, metrics that they need to get on the call, and they really should be doing the training pre-call or a day before the call happens training, instead of post.
I think so let me make a distinction between coaching and training. Training is equipping people with the skills, the knowledge, and the mindset they need to do the job. Coaching is helping them better apply the skills, the knowledge, and the mindset to the job. So training you on how to dribble a basketball might be, okay, well, here's how you physically dribble a basketball. Cool, got it. Coaching you might be, hey, when there's a press break that you're running, here's how we dribble to break the press. So I'm coaching you on the application of those skills in different scenarios. So the idea is you can't train somebody on something. You can't coach somebody on something they haven't been trained on. That's the key. So if we want to coach, what we're looking for is what's the thing that's going to move the needle, is going to have a big impact. You can't coach lots of things. If I coach you on 10 things at once, you're not going to do anything. You're going to get confused and frustrated. And starting with minute 0 of a call, just listening to calls and hoping you find something to coach somebody. I can find you can nitpick all day long. You can nitpick any meeting that anybody's ever been in and find something that you can tweak. Right. That's not useful. What's useful is where are we going? What metrics matter? I use the example of next steps. Well, one of the metrics I love is what percentage of deals have next steps tied to them. And that impacts things like deal velocity. It impacts things like win rate. It impacts things like stage duration. And so what problem are we trying to solve? And then we can use the tools that we have to solve the problem.
And do you think that when a sales manager goes in and says they're going to start, doing some coaching, do they look at individualized coaching per rep and, where the skill gaps are per rep? Or is it, hey, we need to do this as a team? And so they look at all these calls across their team through the same lens from a team perspective. What's your thought on that?
Coaching is usually individual focused. You can coach a team, but if I'm thinking about a situation where the whole team is all struggling in the same areas at about the same levels, it's probably a training issue, not a coaching issue.
Yeah, so if everybody's forgetting to establish next steps consistently across the team, it's more of we need to train the entire sales team on how to establish next steps, and then you would go in and do some individualized coaching on that, on maybe how they're setting those next steps and things like that.
Yeah, or just make sure that, because when it comes to coaching, again, I'll throw another wrinkle in this. Are we coaching mindset? Are we coaching skill set? Are we coaching activity? And so it's one of those things. I always start with inspecting skill set. So I inspect skill set. I say, can they do this? Have I seen them do this before? If the answer is yes, then it's not a skill set challenge. Do they believe that this is the right thing to do, or they feel comfortable doing it? If the answer is no, then it's probably a mindset challenge. You can't change the mindset of a group. You can only change the mindset of an individual person. Now, you can do it in a group setting, maybe, whatever. Like, these are edge cases, right? So I think the whole goal here is ensure the team is trained on what they need to be able to do. So set agendas at the beginning of the meeting, uncover pain, manage resistance, set next steps, compelling demos that are conversations, not presentations, all the basic stuff that everybody does. We use triangle selling, easiest, best sales methodology. There's lots of them out there. They all work if you use them, whatever. The key is making sure we're identifying on an individual basis, what's the thing I can work with this person on that's going to move the needle the most? And then coming out of that coaching conversation, driving accountability to make sure they actually take action. That issue is resolved, and then we move on to the next one. We're just constantly building them up over time, and we can talk more about how we get that to stick and how we get buy-in and all those types of things. But in terms of execution, yeah, if you've got a team of folks, they're probably not all struggling with the same thing to the point where that one thing is going to have the biggest impact for all of them.
Yeah. And then what's the method that you recommend using? Is this you build a scorecard and like an Excel sheet, or how do you track this and, actually provide that feedback while you're, here's the core competencies we want reps to know and to do. And when I listen to calls, these are the things I'm listening for. How do you recommend people do that?
I think scorecards are great, but scorecards are assessment tools. They're diagnostic tools. They're not coaching tools. Computers can't coach people. And I think that's a very important thing to realize, is that computers are really good at processing lots of information very quickly. So one of the things that a computer can do is say, all right, well, we're going to take this call and we're going to look at talk time and monologues and all that type of stuff in the call. Sure, whatever. It can also house scorecards that you can easily click. So if I've got a scorecard in there and I say, all right, well, in my sales methodology on a discovery call, there's 7 things I'm looking at. Well, I can score it. Now, if I give that scorecard back to the rep, we end up in this territory where we're coaching lots of things at once. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. And we're basically leaving it up to them to distill it down to figure out what they're going to do. What we recommend is that the manager can use that scorecard themselves to say, all right, well, based on everything I observed here, and then based on everything I observed around the call, here's what I'm going to coach the individual on. And that's the key. It helps the manager really get at the root cause. And if you've never studied Six Sigma or manufacturing or things like that, there's a really great book that's at a reasonable reading level. It's called The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker, and it gets into quality, and it's all about quality. If you want your eyes to bleed and read the OG book, it's called Out of the Crisis by W. Edwards Deming. He's a PhD in statistics, and he writes like he is. So those are a couple of things that folks can check out to really get into this, because what we're really talking about is quality. Salespeople can only control two things: the quantity of activity and the quality of activity. So as we get into this, what are they doing and how's that compare? I love that you use the competency idea, right? Create a competency matrix that says, here's all the things that we want people to know. Here's all the things we want people to do. And then how are we executing against that? And then based on what we're seeing, what's the biggest opportunity?
Yeah. Have you seen any, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was going to say, so with like that thought or mindset with how coaching and training can be done, I'm interested. How would you use a call recording correctly then? Is there a way? Do you think people can get away with it until they get too big? How would you use it?
No, you use it as a tool. So give me an example of something a salesperson might be struggling with.
That sales
setting a proper agenda, like setting an agenda or an upfront contract at the beginning of the call.
Okay, so let's say setting an agenda. So in triangle selling, we use the plan framework. We pivot from pleasantries. We set logistics. We got 30 minutes for this call. Here's the attendees. We set agendas, their agenda, our agenda, and then we preview what next steps could be. So PLAN, very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can listen to the call and see if they did it or not. And that whole thing right there, depending on how much the prospect talks, is going to take anywhere from 60 seconds to maybe a few minutes if they just unload at the agenda phase. And then there's, I wrote a book called The Triangle Selling Field Guide, and it's got 4 pages of mistakes that people make when applying this framework. So if your managers aren't well versed in edge cases and scenarios and mistakes that people make, it's going to be hard for them to look for those. So the other thing I always recommend is building out a coaching playbook that says, here's the common things people are going to mess up, and here's how you use the tools, in this case, the sales methodology, that folks have available to them to be able to manage and coach those. And if you equip a frontline manager with things like that, then you're rocking and rolling. Otherwise, you're giving them this blank sheet of paper problem, and people suck at blank pieces of paper. Give them a blank piece of paper, like, oh, figure it out. Go figure out what to diagnose. Go figure out how to coach it. How is that setting anything up for success? Imagine if we gave airline pilots all the buttons and all this stuff and fuel in the tank, and we're like, okay, go figure out how to pre-prep for the takeoff. Figure out how to deal with these different scenarios in flight. Nope, it's all in manual. And people are scared of manuals. Whatever. Well, they exist for all the other jobs. They exist for doctors and lawyers and all these super high paid professions. So why wouldn't salespeople have the same thing? Because it works, and it's how quality is created at a systemic level or at an organizational level. Sure, you're going to have your one person that can do it their way. That's fine. But that's not building a company. That's not building a team. That's just relying on one individual. So for it to really be able to persist across an organization, it's like going back to what you said, the competency matrix. So we're looking for people to be able to open meetings like this and capture the agenda. Here's what good looks like. Here's mistakes that people make. Here's edge cases that could come up. Oh, prospect shows up late. Prospect hijacks the meeting. Prospect asks about things that are completely out of scope. Like, do we know how to deal with those? Does the rep know how to deal with them? And if they don't, do we understand how to coach each one of those individual items? It's not rocket science. It's a little more complex than eating a cheeseburger, but we can get there.
It's a good way to put it.
It is a good way. Although I make some pretty gnarly cheeseburgers here on Friday nights normally, and they're not easy to eat.
You put the cheese inside of the meat before you grill it?
I do not do that, but is that something possible?
That sounds like a complex burger.
It's a thing. Yeah. I mean, it's if we want to complexify the burger, you can put the cheese inside of the meat before you grill it.
That seems like a complex in the making. I mean, mine are complex in the eating. They're double stacked, but there's also an egg. There's avocado. Your tomato and onions are sort of rolling off the bun as you go.
I love that.
It's
wow.
It's good.
I'm hungry.
Let's jump into this next one that I also felt was a pretty good one, because I, for one, think that one of the biggest areas of opportunities for a sales rep to improve performance is simply in their preparation for the upcoming sales call. I mean, I can't say how many times I've shown up to evaluate, to potentially buy software, when you can just feel the rep hasn't prepared at all, even the basics, right? They haven't even maybe looked at your LinkedIn to know where you're located in the world, and then they open up the call and ask you, "So where are you calling in from?" Things like
Right.
the basics.
The weather
So,
question, the
yeah,
worst.
the weather question. So there's always, I for one think that there's a lot of value in pre-call prep, and so let's dive into this post a little bit more.
You can overwhelm people if you try to coach them on too many things. But at the same time, if people are making lots of mistakes, you're never going to make progress that has an impact on the business. That's the trade-off that we have to make. So I'll consistently see teams where they've got people who aren't setting good agendas. They're not asking good discovery questions. They're not managing objections well. Their demos suck because they just go in there and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and then say, does that make sense? They don't set good next steps at the end of the meeting. They run out of time. They don't know their customer stories. And it's all this stuff, right? And so you're just like, who's hiring these people? That's the first question. Like, can you imagine if accounting firms and hospitals hired like this? We'd be all walking around, our arms would be backwards,
Yeah.
and the IRS would be sending armed agents to our door.
I'm chuckling here a little bit because I recently won't obviously mention the vendor or the rep or anything like that, but I had this sales call, and there was some post call action items that this individual was supposed to send over, and it's been a week and a half and I still haven't gotten them, and so I feel like I didn't even get any sort of follow up from the call. So I feel like even some of those simple best practices, it's easy for reps to miss on.
I'm taking one guess in the chat. Is that it?
Yeah.
Come on, you got to tell me if that's. I won't say it out loud. Is that it?
Let's see. Jeez.
Oh yeah, it's up top in your share.
No, but that would be really ironic if it was, because the whole nature of their product.
Okay, that's not it.
Because is that one you're waiting on still as well? You're like, yeah.
No, it's just usually when things go wrong, it's them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're my go-to. They're my anti-company. Okay, so when it comes to pre-meeting prep, the key is to understand what needs to be prepped going into the conversation for each stage in the sales process. So first meeting, if you do it, look, everybody has a different sales process. So whatever your first meeting is, whatever your second meeting is, whatever something later on in the process is, and then are you bringing other stakeholders from your team? How are you briefing them? How are you prepping them? What's their role? What's your role? Things like that. Really dialing that in. If you could just dial that in and then take all of the things that you observe in the call and the CRM, their absence of things in the CRM. Maybe we don't have good discovery notes. Maybe we don't have documented next steps. And then in the call, if you always see people telling the same customer story and it becomes irrelevant in some cases, if you always see people running out of time and going overtime, just making sure all of that's captured in the pre-meeting prep, just like any other doctor would do before surgery, a football coach would do before a game, a pilot would do before a flight. This is not rocket science. And I think that for some reason, the sales stuff's been dumbed down to the point of just idiocy. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that run around like, oh, you don't have to go to college to be in sales. Just go be in sales. Like, cool. Well, everybody doesn't have to do anything. But if people don't apply the cumulative learned knowledge of the human race to this profession at some point, then you're just going to create unforced errors and fumbles and every other sports analogy that's negative constantly. And I don't like it.
Yeah. I think this ties into your first point a little bit about coaching, where it's like, look, here's the outcomes we need from this upcoming call, and pre-call planning and all that, that's a controllable. You can control how you set yourself up for the call.
Sure.
And I think if you set up, a pre-call planning guide with a reminder like, hey, look, we need metrics on this call. We need to identify the right stakeholder. That can help set you up for success and continue to move the deal. And then some of these other things that are a little bit tougher, like managing objections, like, you're not going to be perfect at that every time. But if you set the call up right, maybe that's not going to derail your opportunity.
Why wouldn't you be perfect at it every? So let me kick this back.
Oh no!
Why wouldn't I be perfect at it every time?
At handling objections?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know, you haven't memorized all your battle cards for different competitors,
That's your
or
problem. What'd you do last Saturday? Watch The Real Housewives season 6? That's dumb,
that's exactly what I
right?
did.
And so here's what always. Oh, sorry, I know what you were doing last week. You were trying to learn how to play golf so you could hang out with me and Ross.
Yeah. All right. All right.
All right. All right. I won't call you Mr. 106.
It's fair. It's fair.
But my point is that people waste all this time doing stupid stuff that doesn't make any sense. Like, go look at the calendar. So if you're a manager, listen to this. Go pick the person on your team that you're most worried about. Look at the calendar. Last week, was it full? Nope. Cool. Do pre-meeting prep there. Was it completely full? Why are you giving somebody who can't do their job all of these meetings? It's one of those two things, right? It's not that hard. And none of these things are that hard. One of the things I always tell people when so we roll out triangle selling and sales methodology to folks. There's I think there's 12 specific frameworks they need to learn. And within those, there's different applications of them. And then there's obviously edge cases and scenarios, whatever. And sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, it's so much to learn all these acronyms. I'm like, cool, what's mitochondria? And they're like, oh, it's the powerhouse of cell. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. What's photosynthesis? They're like, oh, it's how plants convert sunlight into energy. I was like, all right, cool. So you got all this stuff that you learned 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, and you know it still. And it came from a 1,000-page book. Here's one page. Just memorize all this stuff. It's not hard. Oh, objections. How many objections do people get? They probably get 10. Maybe they get 15. And if you get way in the weeds of something that's a complex product, maybe it's 20, 25. It's not that many. And if you know what mitochondria is today, you can definitely learn what all your objection responses are.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When it comes to pre-meeting prep, what sort of things have you seen work in terms of how do sales managers set their people up for success with, here's what you need to go figure out before a call, here's what you need to come prepared with? How do they actually do that in your experience?
Give them a template, give them a checklist. I'm ripping this from the top of my head. Didn't know this question was coming. Target market. Is the company in our target market? Persona. What's their persona? What do we know about them? What do we need to know about them? Competition. Do we have any competition we know about? Is there any that we want to know about? Discovery questions. What pain does this person probably have, given what market segment they're in, what persona they are, and what their incumbent solution is, for example? What objections do I anticipate? What customer stories should I use? During the demo, based on what I've uncovered, what do I want to talk to them about? And if it's a subsequent meeting, if it's something in the future, like on the pain stuff, on the objection stuff, on the demo stuff, what have we done in the past? What do we want to do into the future? And then you can rip down, we call it resources and triangle selling, political resources. Who's involved so far? Who do we want to get involved? Financial resources. Do we understand all the things about money? How much, where it's coming from, when it's released, blah, blah, blah. And so there's all these other things in the deeper discovery part of things that you want to talk about. And then from the sales process perspective, next step, what do we want coming out of this meeting? And then other things might be disqualification signals, things like that. What are we looking for to say, hey, this is something I want to spike and get rid of? So just having a list of things that you're always looking for. And if you can just fluently rip that list off the top of your head like I am, then you know that your team's got it. They've got it under control. And if someone's a noob to the team, to the industry, whatever, like have them freaking write it down. It doesn't take that long.
Yeah. Right.
I
mean, that's setting yourself up for success. And Ross, maybe you're going to mention something like that, but I mean, if you really have a plan of what you need to accomplish going into the call, that can be extremely important in the success of the deal.
Yeah. And I don't think many sales managers equip their reps with this very basic, I like the word template, but it's, it can even be as simple as go research the organization, any current events or news or anything like that recently that may have happened. It can be then research the individual to understand their role and tenure within the company. It can even be very basics like that on who their buyer persona is. And then, once you get further along, then it's like, now we need to understand, where do we want this call to go? How does this weave into the rest of our sales process? Here's our desired outcome. Like, you start getting more and more complex, but even just some of those basics, I feel like is a great starting point.
Totally, man. And then it helps you control the conversation too, because the person asking the questions is the person that controls the conversation. And I'll throw this out there too. The dumbest question people ask during sales meetings, lots of people do it. I wish there were an audience so somebody could disagree with me on this and they could come fight me on stage, because I love doing that.
Does that make sense? Because I feel like that's probably in the top
that's a pretty dumb question, but that's kind of an obviously dumb question. This one's less obvious, and it's, tell me about your process today. So that is an incredibly dumb question to ask. Here's why. They're going to answer it. And usually people ask this question at the very top of the meeting. They'll ask it after they do their logistics agenda, next steps at the top, or they'll even do it before, because here's why. This person agreed to meet with you. They joined the meeting. That's an open-ended question. They're going to answer it. And they might answer it in depth. They might just give you something that's more brief, whatever it is. You have no control around what the topic of their process they're going to articulate to you. You've basically ceded control of the conversation to the prospect, and they can start talking about all these things that may or may not be relevant to you. As opposed to if we ask something that's more close-ended and we start looking for pain, and we're not doing sales training here, so I'm not going to go into this, but like, how do we focus the conversation on where we win and try to understand, is this prospect struggling with something that we can solve for? And focus the conversation in that area, as opposed to this like broad general open-ended question. There's places for open-ended questions. They're later down the conversation, but that's just one of those things. And so when I see people asking those types of questions, what often happens is they ask it, the prospect says a bunch of things, the prospect starts asking a bunch of questions, salesperson starts answering questions, and then the JV salespeople are like, oh, look at me, I'm answering questions, I'm doing a great job. I'm like, well, your job's not to answer questions, your job is to uncover information, decide if it makes sense to move to the next step or DQ while maintaining a rapport with the prospect. You're not doing any of that, you're just talking.
Right.
And then the call recording software starts showing you that you got 60, 70, 80% talk time. I'm like, cool. So why didn't you guys just rent out a ballroom and do a keynote speech?
Yeah, I think that there's a whole nother episode on how to ask better questions. I've personally asked that question, and I've seen others ask that question, and it does just sort of take you this very random general path, which is not where you want to end up when you want to have a pointed conversation to really uncover the pain points that you can solve for. And so I think that's a really good example.
Yeah. That's it. Tell me about your process. Dumb question. If anybody wants to.
Yeah. I mean, I've opened up in trying to, acquire customers for OverQuota. I've opened up calls and say, tell me about your sales process. And sometimes people answer that question talking about all the top of funnel type of stuff that we have that we do not address at all. And so it's 15 minutes and they're talking about their lead gen and the top of the funnel stuff. And I'm like, that's okay. Finally, when that's over and we have like 10 minutes left, it's like, all right, well, tell me how you handle that first discovery call.
There you go.
What sort of, so what sort of challenges are you finding on that discovery call? And so I feel like I've fallen into that myself. But
if you don't put like
guardrails
around, if you don't put them up, you can ask that question and they could tell you, they'll go on a rant for 15 minutes. They're on fire. And then, they're done. And you're like, wow, that helped me out. Not at all.
Right.
So,
but
now
now
it's
they've
like,
talked. They gave you a bunch of stuff. And so now it's your turn to tell them stuff. And so now they push you in a position.
And you don't have the value because you asked the wrong question. So it's like, well, everything you told me, I can't do. So here's a high level value proposition. And it's like, well, no wonder they never called you back on the deal. The value provided was trash.
Yeah. So next time you hear yourself asking that question where your call recorders, just remember CB being like, oh, look at me. I'm a salesperson. I'm asking questions. Yay.
I know. After this call, I got to go edit a couple guides.
Yeah. Change up our template questions a little bit. Hey, Cory, let's get into this a little bit. Tell people what you're working on with CoachCRM. I feel like a lot of the content we've already talked through probably alludes to what you guys are working on, but give us the elevator pitch on what you guys are doing.
Yeah, we help sales managers coach their teams better, and we help execs get more out of their sales managers. Because what we found is that a lot of times sales managers were folks that were promoted into sales. Sales managers were good salespeople who got promoted in sales management roles. And outside of a stipend to go to a conference, they weren't formally trained on how to be great managers or how to be great coaches. And as a result, they're struggling to get the performance out of their team that they need to hit their goals. And they're anxious that nobody internally is there to equip them. You got a sales enablement team over there filled with folks that may or may not be good at sales enablement, but very rarely do we see anybody on a sales enablement team that was a successful sales manager that went over there. So a lot of times enablement teams are focused on onboarding new hires or playing around with BDRs to try to get them to do their activity. Like that's the majority of, or working on content or working on tools. We don't see internal enablement teams working with sales management. layer. And so the whole idea here is, how do we make the sales managers better at diagnosing and prioritizing what to coach the teams on? We need training around how to actually have really impactful coaching conversations. Actually open source that training, shoot me a note, free stuff at coachcrm.com, and I'll flip it over to you. And then in terms of accountability, how do we drive accountability coming out of those coaching conversations, all while giving executive leadership visibility into what we're working with each person on? And so they can better coach the frontline managers, because a lot of times it's a black box. Second line managers, VPs, CROs, they're struggling to get visibility into what the frontline managers are actually doing. And so it's hard for them to give really good feedback and coaching around how they can tweak their day-to-day to get more out of their people. So that's what we're solving for over here.
Okay. So it's a straight up coaching platform, and not necessarily, not necessarily CRM as in like managing customer relationship management, but straight up solely for coaching. And that's what's taking
Coaching
place
results
in the platform.
management. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we
Nice.
work with
Okay.
folks to up level their coaching. I also own a sales consulting firm for folks that are struggling with
Okay.
sales execution on the individual contributor level.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. I mean, when I first moved into frontline management, my training on how to be a manager was actually, you had mentioned a stipend to go to a weekend course at the hotel down the way or something. But no, mine was actually a free class that I signed up for to go here locally. And it was just a couple of days, and that was all I had, and then jumped in. And other than that, it's been reading books. So I feel like it's definitely a problem. Managers don't get trained on how to be good managers. So I feel like you're approaching and solving an impactful problem here. So
Love it, man. I'm working on a new book too, because I think there's lots of gaps in sales management books. There's one that's decent, but they're not where they need to be. So I got a new one coming out that's
nice.
filling
Yeah,
gaps.
it's I've seen some really good sales managers out there, but then there's different flavors of them, right? You have the hype man who's really good at getting folks just like excited about about the company mission, about hitting quota, but not necessarily good at the the delivery of actionable coaching that helps you improve performance.
Well, the hype man couldn't read a analytics report to save his life.
Right. Then you've got sort of like I think Lemkin calls him Mr. Dashboards, like VP of sales, who's just sort of sits behind the dashboards and looks at the metrics. So I feel like giving sales managers a way that they can identify and deliver that coaching is a cool mission that you guys are working on. Very neat.
Love it, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
What are you guys working on?
Yeah, so we're working on OverQuota, which is a AI sales meeting copilot, which is, interestingly enough, some of the things we talked about with those templates. We equip sales teams with the ability to create templates that include all of their best practices and talk track. So it could have qualification discovery questions, could have the pre-meeting research and prep that needs to be done beforehand, could have some of the talk tracks they need to articulate value during maybe the demo. And then there's also areas in there where you can create prompts, so battle cards, so that when competitors come up in conversations, that information is spit up on the screen basically for the rep to use to navigate that conversation correctly and overcome the objection, or speak to that competitor. So sort of that real time piece, right? So we want to help rep execute during the meeting. Yeah. David, anything you would add to that?
Yeah. So I'm a OverQuota user. Just real quick, how I've been using it. And it's funny, it's a lot of what you and I just talked about, Cory. The pre-call meetings, it used to be, very high level, contact name, a fun fact, years they've been in their position. But now that I've grown with it, it's really, my pre-call meeting is reminders of what I need to get out of the call. And then what actually pops up in real time during the call is the questions on how to get there. So I've been utilizing this with 15 minutes before the call starts, using it as like a co-pilot on the call for reminders on where I'm at in my discovery process, the outcome I'm supposed to get in whatever stage I'm in. And then the battle cards, you made fun of me earlier for not knowing all my competitors. Well, maybe I can still watch Desperate Housewives and update all my battle cards so they're accurate. But that's how all jokes aside, that's how I've been utilizing it. And it's such a great tool for reminding you, here's the outcomes we need to get on the call. This isn't going to be a linear process. And, no one can anticipate 100% how a call is going to go. But what you can anticipate is the right outcomes so you know what pains to get to build the right value, and that's what it's phenomenal for. So that's how I've been using it.
Well, I think we're at time here. Cory, if people want to follow you, reach out to you, learn more about Coach CRM, learn more about anything that you're working on, or books you're writing, or girls you're dating, perhaps, where should they reach out to you at?
Yeah, I'm single and accepting inbound requests. I'm 6'6", 220 with an Ivy League degree. Let's go.
Wow.
But I had to get my elevator pitch, right? I have all my hair.
Yeah.
Somewhat sassy to some extent, and
Yeah.
I enjoy business. Yeah,
Sassy, tall, hairy. There you go.
Well, not hairy. I've got my
it's hair, full head of hair.
Back's clean, TMI, but whatever. you started it, bro.
Important detail. I don't think it's TMI. I think important detail.
Important detail. Some people aren't. Whatever. I can't grow a beard. That's the downside, right? I mean, that's what the trade-off, right? Like, would you rather have a hairy back and a nice beard, or no beard and not have to shave or wax your back?
Good point.
Lots of things. I don't know. So LinkedIn message, or if you want a free copy of my sales coaching course, $500 value, free stuff at CoachCRM.com.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, and
Love you guys.
appreciate your time.